based on some of the statements found in later legends, it's a commonplace these days for people to say that Buddhaghosa was a Brahmin, and that often it follows from that his word cannot be trusted. This is neither true nor is it worthy of any Buddhist to say such a thing. To assume that because somebody's a Brahmin that therefore their work is untrustworthy is racist, or perhaps casteist might be a better word. There's no reason why somebody shouldn't come from any caste and make a contribution to Buddhism. In fact, the Buddha was very clear about this, that the community of samanas was a community of people who had left behind a caste, and that was their role. Their role was to step outside of those expectations that society placed on them. The early Sangha in the time of the Buddha obviously had many Brahmins, among them some of the great disciples of the Buddha, and this was never felt to be a problem at all. So this kind of idea, this conspiracy theory that somehow there's this Brahmin conspiracy to take over Buddhism and so on and so forth, this is all a bit childish, to be honest. There's nothing in Buddhaghosa's work to suggest anything other than he is what he claims to be, and that is to say a scholar of integrity who was trying to present the Buddha's teachings as best he can. Now, having said that, the historical claim that Buddhaghosa was Brahmin is, in my view, almost certainly incorrect. And the reason for saying that is that he seems to be, or the commentaries seem to be somewhat unaware of Brahmanical scriptures and teachings. I found an example of that myself when doing my research into the Satipatthana Sutta, where we have the well-known phrase ekayana. And ekayana is explained in the commentaries, given a number of different meanings. Yet it seems very likely that the actual meaning of it is derived from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which uses it in a very powerful philosophical text. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is not it's not an obscure or unknown text. It's the most important of the philosophical text in India at the time of the Buddha, and this particular dialogue is the most prominent and famous dialogue in the whole of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So any Brahmin would have known this at the time. And yet the Buddhaghosa and the whole Buddhist tradition seems to be entirely unaware of the fact that when the Buddha was using the word ekayana magga, he was in fact invoking a Brahmanical phrase, as he did so often. One of the reasons for being so confident that the Buddha was invoking a Brahmanical phrase is that in one of the appearances of the term, it's actually, the phrase is put into the mouth of Brahma in the suttas. So this is one example. There are many similar examples. One that was pointed out many years ago in the Pali Text Society Dictionary was that the fact that the commentaries give an incorrect explanation for the Pali word visa. Now, in Sanskrit, there are two words meaning all. We have vishva and sarva, both meaning all, both having a similar meaning. Now, for one of those strange accidents of history, only the word sabba made its way into Pali, and the expected form visa hardly ever appears in Pali. But it does appear in one place, and there's one reference to the word visa in a verse somewhere. Now, anyone who knows any Sanskrit would know the word Vishva. It's the name of one of the Hindu gods, Vishvakarma. And yet Buddhaghosa gives an incorrect explanation of the Pali word visa, even though it's clearly derived from that Sanskritic form. So once again, anybody, even not to speak of an accomplished Brahmin scholar, but anyone vaguely familiar with Sanskrit and Sanskritic forms would have known the word Vishva and Visa in Pali. So these kinds of hints taken together, and again, these are just a couple of examples. There are many other cases like that, but to me, these show that quite confidently that Buddhaghosa was not a Brahmin and was not very familiar with the Brahmanical tradition. So let's put an end to this idea that somehow Buddhaghosa was a stalking horse for the Brahmins who was trying to somehow corrupt Buddhism. if there were any mistakes and infelicities that he introduced into the tradition, then let's give him the benefit of the doubt that they are genuine mistakes and the kinds of things that anyone, including myself and including anybody else, can very easily make, especially if you're doing such a lot of work. It's very easy to make some mistakes here and there, so let's have a bit of compassion for these things. Buddhaghosa did not claim to compose the commentaries. He did not claim to be the inventor of a philosophical system, nor did he claim to be in any sense really an original or creative philosopher. And in this way, he is very distinct from someone like, say, Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna is somebody who saw what was happening in the Buddhism of his time. I'm not really sure what his time was, but probably between 200 and 400 CE in northern India somewhere. And he was arguing against certain readings and certain ways of looking at Dhamma and for certain other ways. In particular, he was trying to argue that certain ways of seeing the Dhamma were intrinsically shallow and that we needed to see through those to see through to a deeper perspective of the Dhamma. And that kind of philosophical argumentation, a particularly kind of philosophical argumentation that's aimed at a deepening of philosophical perspective, not just at an arriving at a correct view, but a deepening of philosophical perspective. That's the kind of thing we don't find in Buddhaghosa at all. And in fact, we rarely find that within the Theravadan tradition at all. So Buddhaghosa is not a profound thinker. He's not a creative philosopher. He's a translator. He's an editor. He is an educator. And much of the work that he did and the commentaries that he produced is for the purpose of providing an education curriculum for the young monks, presumably the young nuns who were there at the time as well, but we don't hear that much reference to the nuns throughout his works.